Welcome back, everyone. So we have 3 papers in this session. So we'll start with the study titled "A Study on the Importance of Positive Psychological Capital and Emotional Intelligence in Relation to Burnout Syndrome Among Medical Practitioners of Various Private Hospitals in India." So we have Ranita Ghosh from University of Calcutta, India. Please take it over. I'll buzz you when you're done with, when you're down to 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay, sir. Good evening and good morning, everyone. So, am I audible and slides are visible?
Yes, all good.
I'm Ranita Ghosh. I'm a doctoral research scholar at University of Calcutta, India. My presentation is on the importance of positive psychological capital and emotional intelligence in relation to burnout syndrome among medical practitioners in various private hospitals in India. Basically, it's an ongoing study, and the study I'm going to present here, it's a pilot phase. Understanding mental health sometimes can be difficult because it cannot be seen from outside, and without the help of our medical practitioners, it can be really challenging. But understanding the mental health condition of an individual is important nowadays because WHO statistics have showed that psychological morbidity, anxiety, stress, depression, all these are not only the problem in India, but it's a global problem. So it's a high time for the policymaker to introduce some proactive strategy in the policy. And at the same time, it is also evident from the previous literature, the medical practitioners, they are more prone to develop psychological morbidity and as well as burnout syndrome as well. So these are few literature review which I have done before deciding the objective and hypothesis of my study. The main objective of my study is to understand how psychological capital as mediating variable can impact the relationship between emotional intelligence and burnout dimensions. Here in my study, the ability-based model of EI was taken, which was introduced by Goldman. And for psychological capital, hope, efficacy, and resilience and optimism, these 4 dimensions were taken, introduced by Luthans and his colleague based on the theory of the positive organizational behavior. And for burnout dimension, I have taken emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and professional accomplishment, these 3 dimensions. The main intention was to see how, through emphasizing on positive psychology, burnout can be reduced and job performance can be increased. So I'm straight coming into hypothesis. The hypothesis in my studies are: the first one is emotional intelligence will be dependent on demographic variable. The second one is burnout will be dependent on demographic variable. The third one, burnout will be dependent on COVID-19 related variable. The fourth one is the emotional dimension of emotional intelligence and the dimension of psychological capital will be related. And the fifth one is the dimension of the psychology. There will be relationship between the dimension of psychological capital and the dimension of burnout. And the sixth one is there will be relationship between the dimension of emotional intelligence and the dimension of burnout. And the final one is the psychological capital will play a mediating effect role between emotional intelligence and burnout among medical practitioners. Convenience sampling was used in this study. The sample size was 45, all are medical practitioners from various private hospitals across India. Standardized instrument was used in this study. 5 parts of the instrument, demographic sheets, COVID-19 related questionnaire, psychological capital questionnaire for measuring psychological capital among the respondents, Mashlow's burnout inventory to measure burnout syndrome among the respondent, and Wong and Law emotional intelligence scale to measure emotional intelligence among the respondent. The data was collected between April 22 to June 22 through with the help of Google form. And some virtual interview was conducted to see or to gather some additional information on respondent personal experience. So this was a cross-sectional survey of 45 medical practitioners. Among them, 20% doctor were junior resident, 28.8% doctor were senior resident, and 51% doctor were consultant. Most of the doctor was married and male and have passed their bachelor's degree or the MBBS degree. Data analysis was carried out with the help of SPSS software. Shapiro-Wilk test was conducted to see the normality of the data set, and it was found that data was non-normal, hence all non-parametric test was performed. And statistical tools like chi-square, Mann-Whitney, U-test, correlation, partial correlation, all the statistical tools were used for the data analysis purpose. From the descriptive statistics, it is evident that in burnout dimension, emotional exhaustion and professional accomplishment was higher among the respondent. In emotional intelligence, the self-emotional appraisal was higher among the medical practitioners. So it can be evident that medical practitioners, they were able to understand their own emotions, and from psychological capital, it was higher, so that it can be concluded that medical practitioner was confident in their approach. Testing of hypothesis. The first one is emotional intelligence dependent on demographic variable like gender. The significance is 5%. The hypothesis are rejected here, but what if we can see in the table, the one dimension, which is called other emotional appraisal, which is dependent on gender. So hypothesis is partially accepted basically. The second one is there will be a relationship between burnout dimension and variables like gender, marital status, work experience, etc. From the table, it's evident that burnout is completely independent of marital status and the job experience of the respondent, but it is completely dependent on age group of the dependent and also partially dependent on the gender, because emotional exhaustion, this dimension is actually dependent on gender. So A2 or hypothesis 2 is partially accepted. The next one is the COVID-19 the relationship, 1 minute. There will be relationship between COVID-19 variables and burnout dimension. Here also the hypothesis is partially accepted. Burnout dimensions are partially dependent on the variables like which is related to COVID-19. Like the doctors who have changed their resident with the fear of infecting their family member, their emotional exhaustion and their depersonalization was high. At the same time, the professional accomplishment was low. And at the same time, the doctor who have given the personal protective equipment, surprisingly, their emotional exhaustion and depersonalization was high to moderate, and professional accomplishment was as usual low. So, and the next one is the doctor who thinks they're most quite likely of becoming infected with COVID-19, their emotional exhaustion was also high. So hypothesis 3 is partially accepted here. The next one is there will be relationship between dimension of psychological capital and emotional intelligence among medical practitioners. The dimension of the two variables are positively correlated and hypothesis is accepted here. The next one is there will be relationship between dimension of psychological capital and burnout dimension among medical practitioners. Few dimension of burnout and psychological capital correlated. So H5 is partially accepted. Emotional exhaustion and depersonalization are negatively correlated with the all dimension of psychological capital, and professional accomplishment positively correlated with psychological capital. The next one is there will be relationship between dimension of emotional intelligence and burnout dimension. Here also same kind of picture is observed, that hypothesis is observed. These two variable is negatively correlated with all the dimension of EI, and professional accomplishment is positively correlated with all the dimension of EI. The next one is psychological capital will play a mediating role between EI or emotional intelligence and burnout syndrome. In the first table, it is the relationship between burnout and the EI. It's actually similar like previous. The two dimension is negatively correlated and professional accomplishment is positively correlated. But in the next table, where psychological capital as taken as a mediating variable, there we can see the change in the R values, like here emotional exhaustion and other use of emotion, the value is minus 0.421. Here, the value has changed to minus 0.651. Another is depersonalization and between other emotion. Here, the value is minus 0.501. Here, the value has changed to minus 0.751. So it can be it can be said that emotional psychological capital had played the mediating variable between EI
you have two. Sorry, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
A little less than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Strong negative correlation was evident in the next step. So to summarize what the findings have shown, the emotional intelligence is partially dependent on gender. Burnout is partially dependent on gender and COVID-19 related variable. Completely independent of job experience of the respondent and at the same time marital status, but partially dependent on gender. Negative correlation was found between depersonalization and emotional exhaustion with the dimension of psychological capital and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence and psychological capital is positively correlated, and psychological capital is actually play the mediating role between EI and BS. So improving EI can be helpful to improve psychological capital, and high psychological capital will lead to less burnout. These are some limitations, and finally it can be said, therefore, further research needs to approach the process of burnout syndrome in longitudinal studies. So yeah, these are some references, and thank you.
Thank you, Ranita.
Thank you.
We have a second paper titled The Experience of COVID-19 Related Discrimination and Increased Substance Use in 5 US Southern Cities. And we've got Zhao Ting Zhu as a presenter. Please take it away. Do we have Mr. Zhu here? Okay, so I just got a message that Mr. Zhu is not present. So what we want to do is move on to the third one. So we've got Shirjana Aryal from Central Department of Environmental Science, Tribhuvan University in Nepal. The paper is titled as Assessment of Waste and Occupational Safety and Health in Offset Printing Press Facilities in Bharatpur, Nepal. Please take it away.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to share my slides. Is my slide visible?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, now I'd like to start. Thank you. It's Ms. Shirjana Aryal from Central Department of Environmental Science, Kathmandu, Nepal. And today I'm going to present my research work entitled Assessment of Waste and Occupational Safety and Health in Offset Printing Press Facilities in Bharatpur, Nepal. Talking about printing industries, it is one of the biggest polluters among industries where waste generation is unavoidable. Indoor environment condition of the workplace is one of the constant issues, as most people usually spend their time inside the building. And in printing industries, noise has been ranked among the top occupational risk factor, which is responsible for hearing loss. And there are more than 3,000 offset printing industries where 250,000 employees work. And in Bharatpur metropolitan city, there are 70 offset printing industries. And in Nepal, the offset printing press environment are yet to be investigated. The general objective of the study is to analyze the status of waste generation and occupational safety and health of workers in offset printing presses, which are followed by 2 specific objectives, and they are to investigate the status of waste generation rates and composition in the offset printing press facilities, and to estimate the offset printing press workers' exposure to air and noise pollution. A schematic of the study design is presented in the figure. The 4 offset printing presses were selected based on the type of the production, and the selected offset printing press facilities contribute to 80% of the production in the study area, as shown in the table 1. And here the figure represents the study area. Here the table 2 describes 6 sampling points in the offset printing press A, B, and C with the similar setup, whereas table 3 describes 5 sampling points in the.
Can I briefly, Shirjana, can I briefly
Yes,
interrupt you?
Yes, sir, please.
So take your time, right? So you don't need to rush through the slides because we don't have one participant present.
Okay, sir.
So you please take your time. So
okay,
can you
sir,
please go back to the previous slide? I think previous slide is very important. Yeah. So can you talk about a little bit about the maps and in terms of, you know, where the printing presses lie?
Okay, sir. Actually, my study area was located in Chittagong district, where Bharatpur was the major study area, and I have selected 4 sampling so offset printing presses, which were based on the type of the production. And here, these 4 offset printing presses differ in the types of production, as here press A is based on the press A is based on the book printing and commercial, and whereas press B is mainly based on the commercial purposes. And similarly, press C is similar with the press A, which is based on the book printing and commercial, and press D is different than other, which is only based on packaging. And all of these selected printing press facilities contribute 80% of the production in the study area. I'll like to move this slide. And talking about sampling strategy for objective 1, the waste generation status was carried out for 7 days, and the waste was collected for a 24-hour period, and 24-hour period, and where the waste stream of the solid waste and liquid waste were categorized as recyclable waste, reusable, and non-recyclable waste, and depending upon the suitability of the management option, and where solid waste were further categorized as hazardous waste and non-hazardous waste depending upon the chemical nature of the waste. And for the objective 2, exposure to air and noise pollution, air quality was measured by using Air Visual Pro, and which was operated for 1 hour in each sampling points for 7 days. And also the noise level was measured by using noise level meter. Coming towards the results and discussion, here the table 5 summarizes the total solid waste generation rate in all the selected sample printing press facilities, and the highest amount of the solid waste was generated by press D, and least amount was generated by press B. And among the total solid waste, paper waste was determined to be the most common component, which were found to be sold to the scrap dealer. And here the table 6 summarizes the total liquid waste generation rates in all the selected sample printing presses, among which the kerosene, water plus ink, and lubricant were found to be generated in the highest amount, whereas chemicals were found to be generated in the lowest amount. And among the 3 category of the solid waste, the recyclable waste fraction was generated in the highest fraction, whereas the reusable and non-recyclable waste fraction were generated in the lowest fraction, as depicted by the figure. And here the recyclable waste fraction included paper waste, polyplates, and aluminum plates, which were found to be sold to the scrap dealer, that generated revenue for the printing industries, which is summarized by table 7 in the study area. And similarly, reusable waste included chemical container, which were used for various purposes inside the printing industries, and non-recyclable waste fraction included cleaning clothes, lamination gums, and so on, that are disposed in the landfill sites. And solid waste were further categorized as hazardous waste and non-hazardous waste, where hazardous waste included cleaning clothes mixed with ink and grease, lamination gum, powder and anti-setup, whereas non-hazardous waste included paper, rubber blanket and so on. Here, the time-weighted average concentration of particulate matter and the carbon dioxide is presented in the figure 5 and 6 respectively. And here, the PM2.5 exposure were found to be higher than the threshold limit of Nepal's indoor air quality standard of 60 microgram per meter cube, whereas the PM10 exposure to the exposure were below the threshold limit of Nepal's indoor air quality standard in press A and B, but higher at press C and D. The exposure to the carbon dioxide, the time-weighted average concentration of carbon dioxide were higher at press C, indicating the poor ventilation, and lower at press C, higher at press B and lower at press C. However, the exposure of the carbon dioxide were below the threshold limit of national indoor air quality standard of Nepal of 1000 ppm. The workplace environment can be classified into 4 zones, namely insecure zone, indoor emission zone, comfortable zone, and clean zone based on outdoor and indoor concentration. And here the outdoor versus indoor concentration of PM2.5, PM10, and CO2 are presented in the figure respectively. And here the here the time weighted here the x-axis and y-axis represents the outdoor and indoor concentrations, and each quadrant is divided into insecure zone, indoor emission zone, comfortable zone, and clean zone, and each zone is divided by a line which demonstrates the threshold limit of Nepal's indoor air quality standard for the respective parameters. And here the figure 7 shows that all the sampled press facilities were located in the insecure zone based on the PM2.5 concentration, as PM2.5 exposure exceed the threshold limit, indicating the poor filtering performance and high indoor emission zone. And similarly, here the figure 8 represents that the concentration of the PM10 of press A and B were located in the comfortable zone, whereas press C and D were located in the indoor emission zone and insecure zone, where the exposure exceed the threshold limit, and indicating the poor filtering performance and high indoor emission zone. And similarly, here the figure 9 shows that the concentration of the carbon dioxide of all the sample printing press were located in the comfortable zone, which meet the Nepal's indoor air quality standard of 1000 ppm. Here the daily hourly average noise level in all the sample printing press is shown in the figure 10, whereas the time weighted average noise level is shown in the figure 11. And the time weighted average noise level was found higher at press C, whereas lower at press A. However, the noise level were below the threshold limit, permissible exposure limit of 90 decibel. Coming towards the conclusion, the total solid waste generated was 0.5402 tons per day, of which 96.23% was recyclable waste. The hazardous waste generation rates were lower than non-hazardous waste generation in press A, B, and C, but not in press D. And the liquid waste were found to be drained directly into the underground safety tank without any treatment. The PM2.5 exposure levels were higher than the threshold limit at all sites, and the printing press workplace were classified as the insecure zone, and the PM10 exposure levels were within the acceptable range in press A and B, but higher at press C and D based on the Nepal's indoor air quality standard. The carbon dioxide concentration was highest at press B than press A, B, A, C, and D. However, the exposure level of carbon dioxide were within the acceptable range at all sites. The noise level was highest at the 4-color machine, which ranged between 87 decibel to 90 decibel, which may be due to the highest production rate and compressor. Here are some references used for preparing these slides. I want to acknowledge Central Department of Environmental Science, my supervisor, Narbabu Dital, and co-supervisor, Professor Kedar Rizal, and University Grant Commission and National Youth Council. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So can you please stop? There you go. Great, thank you. 1 second. All right. So can I please ask Ranita to pull up her slide? I don't have sorry, I don't have your slide handy with me right at the moment. I mean, I would have to look for it. Since it's in front of you, can you please share your slide? I have some comments that I would like to make. And there you go. Can you please go to the figure that shows the like you know the where a lot of things are going on, like with arrows and stuff?
The hypothesis one.
Yeah, there you go, that one. So so the main paper, sorry, the main comment for this paper that I have is the caution that perhaps should be provided in terms of correlation versus causality, right? And this happens all the time in different dimensions and various disciplines. But so what I'm seeing from this figure is like a DAG diagram, right? So at least from the statistical perspective. So basically the arrows would point the direction of one variable causing the other one, right? At least this is how I would think about it, right? But so the thing here is, these elements are basically coming from one latent factor, right? And I, as someone who is into psychology, perhaps you know this better than I do, right? And all of these variables are correlated to one another, right? And so when you say psychological capital, this H5 arrow, right, pointing towards burnout, right? So there could be this burnout, you could reverse the arrow and have burnout pointed towards psychological capital. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So that's
related. Yeah, that's
right. So in in economics we have a term for it's called reverse causality, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is like because at the very end of the paper, right? So there is some kind of message or policy relevant sort of point that you share, right? And it's very important to make sure that you have this causal versus correlational stuff down to the very teeth, right? So when you are for instance, providing comments to policymakers, right? So this is the main comment that I have, and it's in some sense I think it would be difficult to do this. I mean, it's always difficult to do this, right? But then the other thing which is doable, I think, is you can collapse the variables. I'm not sure how you did it in terms of the rigor of it, but you can collapse all of these variables into one particular index, right? By using factor analysis and stuff, right? Because so can you please go to the results real quick, like the tables that you show?
Yeah. This tables and
right. So yeah, either one of it, right? So basically, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, professional accomplishment, and all these variables can perhaps be collapsed into one particular index, because once you the thing is, once you treat these variables as separate variables, then you have so basically the inference part will be highly affected, right? So because you have like a multiple sort of treatment problem here, right? So whenever, I mean, if you can do it, like you would have to, so for instance, if you're trying to figure out whether your coefficients are significant, right? So you can't just run like a general model, right? So you would have to sort of treat it as a multiple variable sort of treatment model, right? So that's, and I think it's fairly easy to collapse the variables into one index. So the other comment that I have is regarding the sampling. So I understand this is sort of like a pilot that you're taking out. But whenever you do the sampling, it needs to be a random sampling, or at least cluster random sampling, right? So some form of random element should be there. I'm pretty sure you're aware of this. And so can you reiterate your COVID-19 variables? I think the main theme of the paper should be sort of like grain towards COVID-19, right? You see what I'm saying? Right, so can you
yeah,
can you please briefly reiterate the COVID-19 variables here?
yeah. So I have taken 3 variables. The first one is change of residence through fear of infecting family members. The next one is you were given protective equipment at work to prevent being infected. And the third one is likelihood of becoming infected with COVID-19.
Okay, I see. So again, right, so the comment that I have with these variables would be very tightly related to the main comment that I have, right? Because these are sort of, the variables sort of capture the risk in some sense, right? Like at least some of the variables do. And those would be dependent on your psychological sort of perception, right?
Right.
I mean, if you have some sort of anxiety, then you think the risk is higher for you to, and it could be nothing related to COVID-19, right? So if you just have general anxiety, then maybe you think that you're right. Okay, so great. No, it's a great presentation. I learned quite a bit of stuff. Thank you very much, Ranita.
Thank you, sir, for your feedback.
Thank you. Okay, so then moving on to the second paper. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen if I can. All right, there you go. Okay, so this is for Shirjana, right? So I'm gonna work myself backwards, and please feel free to answer or interrupt whenever you want to. So the first question that I have for Shirjana is, why the printing press? Because I can think of other, and forgive my ignorance here, right? So if I'm misspeaking, please correct me. So I can think of other industries that would generate a lot of pollution in and around Nepal, right? Besides printing press, right? So why would you want to go and take up an experiment or take up a study that relates to printing press. Shirjana?
Yes, sir. Actually, many research have been conducted in other industries, but printing presses environment are not being studied. So I focused in the printing industry. Actually, printing industries are very developed in the Nepal. They generated different kinds of air pollutants, and mostly workers are exposed to the air and noise pollution. So I mainly focused for the printing presses.
That's great, right? So this should be your motivating slide, right?
Yes, sir.
You know what I mean? So you should use this exact same, whatever you just mentioned, as your motivating slide. You know, and if you could bring forth some statistics saying, you know, printing press in general on average generates this bit of pollution compared to, you know, other industries, that would be even better, right? So I think the ingredients are very much there in terms of your study, but you can improve on motivating, right? So the other some minor comments that I had was, so when you measure the noise and particularly noise measurements, right? So I'm curious to understand, how are the measurements done? You know, like in terms of how frequent is the data being collected there?
Actually, I have mentioned that I have shown that sampling points for press A, B, C are the 6 sampling points, and where your Visual Pro, your quality was measured using your Visual Pro, and for in each sampling point, the your visual was operated for 1 hour, and noise level were measured for the 1 hour within 5 minutes interval, sir.
Cool. So do you know which part of the day?
Actually, data of the air and noise was collected only when the machines were operated.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, that's great. Okay, cool. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
And in terms of the other question that I had was, I mean, these are very minor questions, right? So are the recyclable waste actually recycled? Because the major sort of waste that is coming out is something that can be recycled, right? Because I think it was like 80% of materials that could be recycled, I believe.
Yes, sir. Mostly the recyclable waste were paper waste, poly plates, and aluminum plates, which were sold and that are sent to the recycle. So I have.
Hello.
Yes,
Shirjana?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, great. Sorry, can you finish your sentence? Where like you're saying that the plates were sold and
yeah, they that among all the waste generated, highest proportion were paper waste, and that I have already mentioned, that are sold to the scrap dealers, which were used for various purposes, sir.
Sure. Okay, so then we have press C. That seems to be the worst one of 4, right? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, sir. Worst in the sense.
Yeah, I think in terms of PM measures and yeah, I think in terms of the PM air quality measures, right?
Air quality. Yes, actually, air quality, particulate matters dependent on the control system and the air exchange rate, and and the pollutant were released during the working process, where these sprays were based mainly more production. So the particulate concentration may be highest due to the surrounded paper dust in the area and dealing with the paper work.
Okay, so great.
And,
so
and
then,
also it was around the industrial area. It was located in the industrial area. So it.
So my final question, right? So my final question. So if you were to provide.
Do you mind continuing this over chat, because we have to take a 5-minute break and we'll have to start.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's come back after 5. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
So, Shirjana, I have one last question.
Okay, sir.
You don't have to answer it, but maybe it's worth a thought, right? So if you were to provide, comments to policymakers in terms of waste management, right, and noise management, and in general pollution, what would your comment be?
Waste pollution, waste management. Actually, for
no, to a policymaker, right? So to a policymaker,
their disposal system should be focused.
Okay, so maybe that's that's worth thinking about it, right?
Okay, sir. I'll.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was wrong.
Okay, no, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can continue with the question answer from the audience maybe for 5 minutes, and then we can take a break. I was wrong. We still have we had 10 minutes left when I said that we have 5.
Oh, okay. So yeah, no. All right, let's do that then. So I'm done with my questions. I'm sorry if I took long time here. So let's move on to the chat. Let's stop this. And all right. So we've got one question from Dr. Bohara. Well, it's more sort of like a comment from Dr. Bohara than a question, I think. So it'd be nice to see this idea frames as one of the 5 health models, health belief models, trans theoretical models, theory of reasoned action. Yeah, so also variables like emotional intelligence or burnout, etc., can be modeled as a latent variable, right? Yeah, so this is something that I was getting at as well. And we have another comment from Kushiman Poon, also including the averages of all 4 presses gives a general idea about the printing press in Bharatpur. Yes, absolutely. Boom, boom, boom. So we've got quite a bit has happened in chat, seems like. All right, so I think these are general comments that the presenters can read on the chat itself, and they're self-explanatory, most of it, right? Any other, so we still have some time. If anyone wants to jump in and ask questions, please do so. Are there any questions? So presenters, if you wanna clarify some of the comments that has been raised in chat, please do so. So Ranita, do you have any clarification that you would like to give?
Yeah, ma'am, Disha ma'am was asking about the baseline statistics. So I just want to know that for clarity that I have divided the medical practitioners into 3 groups. But before, I mean, all they are practicing doctors. But is there, I mean, any, I mean, necessity to, I mean, should I collect data, I mean, when they have not started their practice, when they were students and like this? So is there anything, I mean, will it make any difference in that, or will it impact my research study? So just for clarification, I wanted to know.
I just wanted to like I thought it would be a good idea to compare like before and after, you know, like I mean, I think they are already more self-aware when they have like did all their education, but I think it will just give us better results, or like maybe like a difference you can compare before and after. So that was my question.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and it's more so of a, it's more so, now I think about it, it's more so of a question of external validity, right? So can you actually say something about, so because it's particularly just focused on the medical sort of, occupation, right? So the question is, can you actually say something about like more general public from your study? Although I understand you're focused in like, the medical sort of part, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Vinish, I think she can continue answering over chat if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Now
absolutely.
it's actually the time. We'll be back here at 9:30.